I always start this conversation by reminding non-Black people of color that every sort of privilege, power, sort of access that we have has been on the backs of Black suffering and resistance. And that we have to remember that and we have to make that connection.
Thank you so much, Haewon, for meeting with me and my co-founder, Kelly Chin. Kelly Chin is listening in on this interview. It is 4th of July weekend and we have fireworks going off in the background. Happy belated Juneteenth. I am so interested in your story. Can you talk about who you are and how did you get here today?
And the daughter of an immigrant Korean mother, Ethiopian father. You know, my parents, when they got married, my mother, her Korean family, really didn't talk to her because anti-Blackness is real. A lot of the racism I experienced and the anti-Blackness I experienced was not from white people growing up. A lot of it was from Korean and Asian people. Being called like the N-word for the first time was from Korean folks, being called a dirty Asian. Those were like some of my experiences coming into my identity as someone in elementary, middle school. When I was in high school, I was part of a social justice humanities magnet where we learned a lot about race, and we went back and revisited the 92 uprising, learning about how and remembering. So I'm like learning and remembering how what happened in LA was really centered around the beating of Rodney King and how quickly it turned into, following that incident when the verdict came out and LA was up in flames and people were rebelling and resisting, that the media put on loop the shooting of a 15-year-old Natasha Harlan by a Korean store owner, and how quickly the narrative shifted, and how Black and Korean people were left to fight each other. I think understanding that history really made me want to do a lot of healing around my Korean identity. When I started getting politicized, I started meeting radical Koreans. I started meeting queer Koreans. I started meeting Korean organizers. And I didn't even know politicized Koreans existed. It was like an oxymoron. Yeah, that journey really led me to visit Korea, to learn about social and political movements in Korea, and really being able to make connections, one, around how badass my people are, and two, like being able to connect like how Koreans have historically been able to connect their struggles to Black liberation. And I think it really helped me as like an organizer really understand how two of my identities are so important in fighting for liberation and racial justice for all.
You are also an activist. Can you talk more about your experience with Black Lives Matter Los Angeles and all that you have achieved?
As a young organizer, I met someone I was working with at the same time who's now my best friend, Kwonji Lee, who told me about this program called KEEP, Korea Education Exposure Program. It's run from a movement group in New York called Noredol, and they bring Korean Americans to the peninsula, to the north and south of the Korean peninsula every summer. And so I applied to go on the 2013 trip. I learned about US imperialism. I learned about anti-Blackness and the ways that the US has exported it outside of our borders. I don't think I really knew much about the Korean War outside of when it happened. I don't think I even really comprehended that the war had never ended and that there was a line drawn, literally dividing my family, and like the historical impact, like the traumatic, the trauma, the generational trauma that's passed down, learning that there were actual words. So after this trip, I really connected to my Korean identity in ways that I had never in my entire life. And when I came back to LA, my friend Kwonji and I, we met two Bay Area Korean organizers who had started a group called HOBA, Hella Organized Bay Area Koreans. And a lot of their work was really around these pieces. How do we activate and engage and build a movement of radical Koreans? And so my friend Kwonji and I started our own kind of sister chapter in LA called Subak. So BLM LA initially started the banner of Justice for Trayvon Martin in LA. And the chapter started back in 2013. It started with like, folks just need to be together and grieve and take up public space. After the death of Mike Brown, there was a huge call for Black organizers, Black organizations, Black people to just ride to Ferguson. So we did a caravan ride. When we all returned back to the cities and places that we came from, we just took lead from Ferguson. Historically, also Asian people, API folk, our identity has been used as a weapon of anti-Blackness. And that looks like the model minority myth of being all of these kind of tactics that have been used to make people of color try to move people of color further and further away from Blackness as the goal. We're in a new moment where just issues of race are so much more complex. It's not, there's a lot more nuance. It's not so black and white. I can share this even as an Ethiopian person. Growing up as a Black person, hearing people in my family say, we're not Black, we're African, with this idea of, we don't come from slavery. Ethiopia prides itself, rightfully so, for picking out Italy, being one of the only countries in Africa that has been able to hold on to its culture and language and identity in ways that a lot of folks haven't because of colonization. And so even if you look at that example, there's this deep entrenched anti-Blackness that we as Black people even hold. I think we have to have more nuanced conversations that really have us examine white supremacy, really examine the impacts whiteness and white power and domination have had on our psyche, on our spirits, on our mental health. And we have to, as people of color, we are the global majority, and being able to connect, we often call ourselves the minority, and a friend of mine were like, we're actually the global majority. And I'm like, oh yeah, you're right. And so just what is this shared collective experience that we have across different identities, nations, cultures, languages?
Can you talk more about what it means to vote and how can we vote intelligently?
I think voting is important, so our voices are included in decisions that impact our lives. And I think that we have to, in every way possible, fight being silenced and being told that our voice doesn't matter. And I'll start there. I think ways that we can vote intelligently are understanding that voting won't save us. I'm currently in Los Angeles doing organizing work with my BLM LA chapter, which has been awesome. I'm seeing the growth. It's been a long and lonely journey. And to see us 7 years later with the masses talking about abolition and defunding the police as a real tangible thing, we're in a place where people are really imagining that possibility, taking back their imaginations and really seeing it as a possibility. We are a new generation. I think a lot of us come from parents who are first generation immigrants, came here, but a lot of us grew up here. And so our neighborhoods and our lived experience, our friendships, the culture that we consume is just different from our parents. And I think we, especially as Asian folks, we've been taught that we don't matter for so long, that our voices don't matter, that we just slide by, and we should just be happy and grateful for what we have. And I just want to push all of us and remind all of us that we come from a legacy and a history of resistance, that our people are very strong, and we have to we have to ask ourselves which side we're on right now, because really there's only two sides at this point. It is the people versus the state. It is the colonized versus the colonizers. And it's the people who have been historically oppressed with those who have continued to maintain their power against us. For a long time, we have fought for reform. And we have done everything our people that came before us, the people who have fought before us, the people in our generation who have fought, have checked every box when it comes to reform. From changing laws to telling us that if we go to school and we get educated, we can do better for our people, that we can make change if we get into high places, if we get into positions of power. And I just want to remind folks that we're in a place where we have the most millionaire, billionaire people of color, Black folks, brown folks, Asian folks. We have the most representation of folks in government. And we had a Black president. We had a Black president, the highest position of power, and under his presidency saw the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement. If that's not telling of why reform is no longer on the table and why we need to reclaim our imaginations and create something new. And we can do it. We can create something better than this. And a lot of that's going to require us to know our history, to really love and protect each other, and to take back our power.